Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me here today. And here's a clicker. So what if I told you that some of you have a superpower inside of you, right? And that maybe some of you don't realize that you have this superpower and that it needs to be awakened, that it needs to be identified. Well, these are some of our superheroes, right? So today, my company, Catalyte, we're a workforce data science company. And we're using AI to identify superpowers in people. Now, for the first category that we went after actually is software developers. It's not obvious today that great software developers can come from anywhere, from any background. These are some of my superheroes. These are some engineers in the company. What makes them unique is that prior to joining Catalyte, none of them had ever written a line of code. None of them have actually studied computer science or engineering or any technical fields. And I'll come back to a little bit about what they did before or later. And I say that this is a superpower because these are people who were identified through essentially a 2-hour assessment. We asked them using an email address, they applied to join our company on our website, and they were directed to an online assessment that they took. And in 2 hours, we were able to identify if they had this potential. Now, why do I say it's a superpower? They are not just good software developers, they're amongst the best. They're one of the top, they rank consistently in the top 10% of performance in terms of software developers with our clients. What's also interesting about them, and why I'd say it's a superpower, is that they're going through something, they went through a full computer science degree, something that most people who are developers spent years doing in college. They were able to complete a full computer science degree in just 20 weeks. And we're able to scale up and become professional software developers today. What we're doing, and I want to emphasize, is that we're not a jobs program. It's not a charity. We are finding these brilliant needles in a haystack. These are people who have the potential, who have this ability, but for one reason or another, we're not given the opportunity to pursue those capabilities earlier in life. So, as I mentioned earlier, all you need to do to apply to the company is take an online screening. Now, this screening is pretty interesting in the sense that it's not a standardized test. So people think that this is an assessment. And it doesn't start from a construct of what we think success looks like. We actually put people through what looks like an aptitude test, but it's actually, we're tracking what they're doing while they're taking the test. Right? We're actually tracking keystrokes, we're tracking what they're doing on the browser, and we're able to, from that interaction of how they're actually solving problems on this test, we're able to assess certain thinking styles, certain patterns of thought. We're finding people who are incredible problem solvers, people who will run through walls to solve a problem. We're finding people who exhibit something we call cognitive agility, which is a person's propensity to make decisions using evidence and data, but more importantly, change their minds, change their approach when presented with new evidence and new data. We're finding people who are able to synthesize information, synthesize complexity, take complex problems and break them into simpler pieces. Tenacity, grit. We're finding these core attributes in people. And from that, we're able to actually put them through a full training program, 20 weeks, computer science degree. At the end of that program, they become apprentices. They're hired into the company, and today, the majority of our workforce actually comes through this screening. Quietly, over the last 2 years, we became the largest engineering services company, pure onshore engineering services company in the United States using this approach. Right, so our workforce, and by the way, we have no recruiters in the company, so our entire workforce is assembled using software. It all starts, actually, how do you actually approach this? It starts first with killing the resume, right? Killing pedigree as the basis of allocating opportunities. As we all know, the resume today faces a lot of biases, right? The first bias really is from the person who writes that resume, who compiles their own track record. In this day of LinkedIn, there are actually companies out there who help you optimize your LinkedIn profile to match sort of keywords that recruiters are looking for. So we start with first killing the resume. We don't want to know anything about a person when they apply. That's why all you need to do to apply into the company is an email address. By design, we don't want to know anything about your background. We don't want to know your job experience, where you went to school, your age, any demographic data. Resumes are also, pedigree is also a terrible way of actually allocating opportunities because of the bias of the people reviewing the resumes, right? Doing the interviews, right? There's a lot been written about affinity bias, confirmation bias, attribution bias. Ultimately, what it all really means is that people have a tendency to hire people like themselves, or who fit a model that they think success looks like. The reason I have an orchestra string here is that there was until the 1970s, orchestras in the world were primarily male-dominated. It wasn't until an enlightened conductor in the 70s put up a blind screen during auditions that in that one sort of assessment, they were able to increase the female participation on orchestras by 30%. When they put carpeting down so you couldn't hear if a person was wearing high heels or male shoes, increased even further. Right? So there's these subtle biases that make their way into people who are assessing whether or not a person actually can do the job. This resume here is probably somebody that was applying to be a software developer in the 70s to HP. Interesting enough, I mean, how many of you would have hired the person or actually asked them to an interview? Probably most of you wouldn't have. You would have missed out on hiring Clark Kent, because this is Steve Jobs. All right. So it gives you a sense, again, that resumes are very much a two-dimensional representation of what a person's ability really is. So today at Catalyte, we're finding people from all walks of life. Right? All types of backgrounds. In fact, we've actually found that there is actually no socioeconomic correlation at all with what it means to be a great software developer. Coming from Silicon Valley, there's sort of this stereotype that software developers are white and Asian men. And we've actually found that to not be the case. Right? And what we found is that the more diverse the background, that people are bringing a different level of life experiences to the job, to being a software developer, when you're actually hiring from these unconventional backgrounds. So how does it work today? So where's the AI? The secret of what we're doing is that, and the reason why we deliver engineering services is that we're using all the outcome data that's being produced every day, thousands and thousands of data points at any given moment from the engineering services that we deliver to our clients. At the heart of what we're doing today, we're disrupting outsourcing, right? But actually, the reason why we're actually doing engineering services is in service of getting the data set. Right? And we're taking, from the moment a person applies to join the company, from the time they apply and take the test, all the way through training, all the way through their life and their career at the company, all that outcome data is being collected. Right? And that's actually going to giant data lake that we actually then run these predictive models against, our hiring models against. Now, what's in the algorithm? Right, today, the hiring algorithm, there's about 5,000 different models in there. And the first question a lot of you probably ask is, how do we make sure there's no social bias? Right, there's no bias put into it. The first beginning is that we don't start from the point of what does success necessarily look like. Right? We don't have a construct. I mean, if you look at a lot of other assessment companies, there's usually some organizational or behavioral psychologist who has a model that they're actually creating a test against. We don't do that. In fact, what we do is that we have a data science team that basically is, they're constantly spitballing predictions. In fact, by the end of this year, we're going to start open sourcing some of our models, right, to the world. But what we do is actually we start from the basis of what actually has signal. And I'll give you a sense. Here's a secret, and please, friend DA, don't share this with the world, but one of the models that we've actually found is that when a person is taking this assessment, when they're taking this, what looks like a test, if they open 3 or more browser tabs while they take that assessment, it actually has high degree of signal with whether or not this person is actually going to be a successful software developer. Right? I don't know why, right? But we've actually found that there's signal between people who open lots of browser tabs and people who actually are able to complete this intense training and who actually can end up being successful developers. We assess based on, for example, there's a section on our test that looks like logic puzzles. And each puzzle looks kind of the same, but there's something slightly different about it. And we want to see that people change their approach, right, as they go through. So it's based on those kind of models that have no demographic data, we didn't ingest no demographic data on the back end or on the front end of our funnels. And so we're basing it based purely on how people solve problems. And continually, the reason why this is a feedback loop is from the moment that they join all the way to the time that they leave the company, all that data is being collected and it's actually being reused. And it's constantly the system continually, machine learning algorithms are actually optimizing the system over time in real time as we get more and more production data from our clients and from the people coming through the company. What's interesting about this is that we've actually proven now, and this is data that our clients are now starting to share. In fact, a number of our clients have actually published data about this at Gartner conferences that shows that these teams of unconventional software developers are actually outperforming traditional pedigreed teams. One of our clients was to show that compared to the 2 tier 1 vendors that they were working with prior to Catalyte, we were producing 3 times the productivity as measured on a cost per agile story point. The teams are producing higher quality, 30% faster velocities in sprints, right? So they're delivering faster. They're delivering more consistently. They're ramping up faster, right? So when you look at sort of the outcome data, we're actually showing, we can prove that our teams are producing better outcomes, right? That they're actually outperforming traditional teams. And this is actually one of the key reasons why I understand a lot of people have a lot of skepticism. Like a person who actually didn't go to college could actually be a great software developer, who actually could become amongst the best software developers. We prove it every day with the outcome data that we generate. What's also interesting, I mentioned earlier about diversity, right? So if you look at our team, one of the really interesting things that we've actually proven now is that adage that ability is evenly distributed, even if opportunity isn't. So when you look at our workforce, and just to put a fine point on it, we don't have recruiters in the company. So software is assembling these teams for us. I don't know what my workforce looks like until they show up the first day on training, right? But what's interesting is that it looks like the populations that we hire from. So we're headquartered in Baltimore. Baltimore actually is the oldest development center in the company today. And over the last 6 years there, we've proven that Baltimore actually is our center there reflects the demographics of that community. Baltimore, the metro area, is 28% African American. Over 6 years, we have 29% African American developers out of Baltimore. We're not quite at gender parity, but we've got about 36% female developers there over that period. Average age of people coming in is 33 years old. But the age range distribution is anywhere from 18-year-olds to 72-year-olds coming through here. And what's interesting is educational background, right? So there's this myth that great software developers need to have gone to Stanford or MIT or Caltech, that they were all nerds in high school that then became software developers. That's actually not true, right? So if you look at it today, about a little less than half of our workforce didn't go to a 4-year degree, right? A third didn't go to any college at all. Right? And that actually jives with experience, because if you think about it today, the titans of the software industry all were either dropouts or didn't go to college. Right? If you think about it, computer science as a discipline, as a major, really is only something that's been in the last 30 years. Right? All great software developers before then were all self-taught. And actually, if you think about today, if you talk to some of the greatest software developers in your company or in your industries, you'll find that most of them were self-taught. They were the kids who were actually working on this stuff when they were in their teens or earlier. Now, what's really interesting is that, the real problem that we're looking to solve today is, the labor market, right? If you think about today, you have here a factory, right, in Baltimore, an old steel factory that got shut down. Baltimore was home to Bethlehem Steel, which at one point employed 350,000 people in the factory, right? It's been shuttered since then. So in this country, we have millions and millions of underemployed and unemployed Americans. At the same time, we have millions of jobs that are going unfilled in the US because employers are saying they can't find the skills from the people who are applying, right? There are 600,000 open software developer positions right now, right, that are going unfilled because people say they can't find developers. At the same time, social mobility is at the lowest ebb, right? If it is actually, social mobility is really a myth in the United States today, in the sense that it was more likely for you to have you had more social mobility at the time of the Pilgrims, when they came to the country, than there is today, right? In fact, Harvard put out a study that today, social economic mobility in the United States is similar to the medieval times. Right? It's actually very rare to take a person from the bottom 25th percentile and move them to the top 25th percentile. And the reason being is that we've used pedigree to lock people out. Right? We've used college as a way of locking people out of careers. Right? And really what we need to be able to start thinking about is how do you actually take people who have ability and connect them to opportunity. We can solve the problem of the digital divide. We can solve the problem of socioeconomic inequality by starting to change that mindset. So I want to go back to some of these superheroes. What's interesting about their backgrounds, as I mentioned, Nastasia on the upper right hand here, or your left hand here, she was a cleaning lady in a hotel, right, before coming to Catalyte. She found us because a friend of hers who was also an immigrant from Belarus was already a Catalyte and asked her to take this assessment. She passed and today is an application developer. Dan Ruther on the upper right here. He was a roofing contractor who lost everything in the housing crisis, had to move in with his in-laws, And today actually is a team lead, a tech lead, leading projects, leading big teams. What's interesting, I always like to say, is he was leading big construction crews before, right? Building buildings, doing roofing contracting. And today, for him to lead a Scrum team, it's no big deal, right? He brings a different level of leadership, a different dimension of leadership and emotional intelligence that you don't typically find in other, tech leads. Or Tim Reed, he was like a lot of Americans. He was going to Morgan State, had to drop out because of school loans. He couldn't afford it. So he dropped out, found out about Catalyte. Today he's a software developer, just bought his first house. He went back and finished his degree afterwards, once he could afford to do so. Right? So there's about 700 developers in the company today, and each and every one of them has this amazing story of transformation. I should also mention, actually, at the outset, it's not just disadvantaged. It's not people who actually can't go to afford a college. It also skews the other way, in the sense that we always have PhDs and MBAs, right, who are coming through our program. So again, this approach is changing the way that we think about talent and ability, and hopefully our big vision is to kill pedigree as a basis of allocating opportunities in the country. Thank you.